This happened in Minnesota in 1994. I was 12 or 13 at the time and wanted a pop. We kept the pop in the basement in a miniature cube refrigerator. We had it on a sturdy plastic milk crate covered with a towel. The fridge was on the left side of the TV by the fireplace. Across the room was a wall that had 3 large arch-top mirrors. I was bending down to reach into the fridge when, out of the corner of my right eye, I spotted something. I turned my head and, much to my astonishment, saw a girl. I only saw her for a second or two, but I knew she was a ghost. It was pretty obvious since she was transparent and, oh yeah, had no face. She had long blonde hair, and where her face should have been, it was just a light brownish gray color. She was wearing a floor-length Little House on the Prairie era dress. It had vertical light blue and white stripes with a white ruffle from the shoulders and across the chest dipping into a slightly stretched out U shape with a few white buttons starting at the collar and going down the front a few inches. I didn't get any bad feelings from her. In fact, I got the feeling that she was surprised that I noticed her. Also that she was just passing through. I didn't notice a reflection, and she was standing in front of the 3 almost ceiling to floor-length mirrors. In a blink, she was gone from sight. I was a bit stunned. This was the first time I'd ever seen a ghost. I continued reaching into the fridge to grab my pop. Even though I couldn't see her anymore, I said, "I'm just getting a pop and going back upstairs," just in case she was still there. I wasn't freaked out, but I hauled ass up the stairs anyway. I immediately called my best friend to tell her about what had just happened. I was the only one home and needed to tell somebody. Plus, she was just as into the paranormal as me, so I knew she'd believe me. My parents had our house built in 1984. We've always been the only occupants. The land used to be Native American grounds and then cornfields. Based on her dress, I thought she looked like she was from the 1800s. Which probably would have been when it was farmland mixed with woods. Trees that are still on our property to this day. Old oaks, especially. I never thought our house was haunted, especially for those reasons. That was also the only time I ever saw her. I told my parents and sister about this later that day, when everyone was home at once. They all believed me. It was a cool experience. I hope she wound up where she was supposed to go when she passed through our basement and made a living friend. Second story, burned down cabin, submitted by Little Dark Path. This is my mom's story through her dad's side of the family. This happened in Grantsburg, Wisconsin in the 1970s. My mom's paternal grandfather bought a cabin with a good deal of property. In Grantsburg, Wisconsin, sometime in the 1900s, maybe toward the 50s. She and her family used to go there, coming from Minnesota, during the summer for a few days growing up, getting to see all their cousins, aunts, uncles, grandpa, and to have a great time fishing, swimming, just being in nature, and being together. The only thing my mom didn't like were the bugs, scattering into the wood logs of the cabin when they'd turn the lights on in the room she was staying in. That was creepiest thing she ever noticed there. One winter in this 1970s put an end to their summer excursions to the cabin, unfortunately. Her grandpa that owned the cabin didn't stay there over the winter. He lived in Minnesota the rest of the year. Nobody lived in the cabin during the winter. During this winter, her grandpa got the news that his cabin had burned to the ground. He found it suspicious since nobody was there during the winter. He knew that one of his relatives, I think it was one of his brothers, that also spent time there during the warmer months, had issues with some of the local guys. Serious enough issues to where they suspected them of setting the cabin on fire. Either he and one of his brothers or 2 of his brothers wanted to go see the ruins and to see if they could salvage anything. When they were coming upon the burned-down cabin on foot, they could see some of the charred beams. As they got closer, they saw much more than just those charred beams. They saw a girl standing in the middle of the ash and other charcoal cabin remains. She looked to be a teenager. She was very pale, had long dark hair, and was looking around at the debris with a very sad expression. What really stuck out to the men was that she was wearing a summer dress in the middle of a Wisconsin winter. She vanished as they trudged closer to the cabin through the snow. They found out that one of the previous owners of the cabin lived in it year-round and had a daughter that died in it. Obviously, she hadn't moved on. Perhaps she didn't know she was dead. From the heartbroken expression on her face while she was looking around at the burned rubble of her home surrounding her, maybe she realized that her family was long gone, as well as herself. I like to think she was finally realized everything and was able to move on to be with them and where she was supposed to be after vanishing before their eyes. Third story, Grandpa's Warning. If you heard the cabin story prior to this one, it has to do with the same grandpa of my mom's from that story. This is my mom's story for the most part, but I was part of the events as well. This took place in Minnesota in 1985 or 1986. My mom loved her paternal grandpa dearly. He always made her feel loved and safe. He also was protective of her in life and after. One winter night, my mom was woken from her sleep. The room was pitch black and my dad was asleep next to her. She was looking up at the ceiling when she started noticing swirling in the blackness. Then there was some light and little sparks mixed in with the swirls. She wasn't scared. She got a peaceful feeling. That's when her deceased grandpa's face started to materialize in the middle of all this light and dark swirls. He didn't speak with his mouth. Instead, she heard him in her head. He told her, "Something bad is going to happen, and you're going to be hurt, but no one else will be." She was stunned at what she was seeing and hearing in her head. Even though it wasn't good news, she was still getting a very calming feeling from him. Then it all faded away, and that part of the room, a few feet above her face, went back to pitch black. A few days later, our parents took us to a sledding area. Several things happened that day while we were there. There was a jump that some teenagers had made at the end of one of the hills. My mom purposefully tried to steer me away from it, but I hit it anyway and took flight. I remember seeing pine tree tops while clutching the handles as tightly as I could of my snow ghost toboggan and closing my eyes until I landed. My sister fell off her toboggan and scraped the side of her face by her eye. When we were getting ready to leave, my dad realized he dropped the car keys somewhere in the snow. I don't know how, but one of us somehow found the keys. But those three things were nothing compared to what happened on the way home. We were at a stoplight when the two guys in the car behind us were bending down below the dashboard to light a joint. My mom saw their car barreling up behind us, fast, not even trying to slow down a little. My sister and I were in the back seat, buckled in. But back then, the seatbelt in the back only went across your lap. Seeing this car coming at us, she instinctively turned around to push us back. They rear-ended us pretty hard. Even though our mom was pushing us back, the impact was still hard enough to fling me forward enough to hit the back of the driver's seat on the outside of my right eye socket, and it hurt. It wasn't just a light bump into the back of the driver's seat. To make matters worse, the car behind the stoners rear-ended them. We were rear-ended twice. My dad and sister were fine. I really was as well, just a little bit tender for the next few days, where my face hit the back of the seat. Mom, however, wasn't so lucky. She had a really whiplash whiplash from this double rear-ended car accident and trying to protect us from the impacts. It was so bad she had to wear one of those whiplash collars for months. She had to go to the chiropractor at least 3 times a week the rest of the winter, throughout the summer. My sister and I spent most of our summer going with her to those appointments. We were too young to stay at home alone, and probably into the fall of that year. She still has problems with her neck ever since then. Her grandpa's warning came true. I always wondered why he didn't, or possibly couldn't, intervene to keep her from getting hurt. But he did appear to her, warned her, and let her know everything would be all right even though she'd be hurt. He never appeared to her again, but I'm sure he was always looking out for her, his grandson-in-law, and his 2 great-granddaughters. 4th story, disappearing act. All these instances happened in Minnesota. I'm sure this has happened to almost everybody at least once, if not more than a few times. The first time I dealt with something of mine going missing was my TV remote. The remote control for the TV I had in my bedroom growing up controlled the standard power and channel changing. These were also available manually on the TV. However, for some really weird design and manufacturing reason, there was no manual volume on the TV, just through the remote. One day I couldn't find it after I had just been using it. It should have been right where I left it, but was gone. I searched and searched around and under my bed, and under and around the nightstand next to my bed. I also looked everywhere else I could think of in my room, even though there would have been no way it would have been anywhere else than on my bed where I left it. I did suspect that my sister might have moved it to tick me off and drive me crazy. We'd just had a fight, but I'd only been out of my room for a minute after our argument. There would have been no way she could have gotten by me into my room to do that so quickly. Plus, she knew about the volume only being on the remote, and it would affect everybody without me being able to turn it down. It had been several months and I still hadn't found it, which was pretty annoying. The TV's volume wasn't exactly quiet. In fact, it was loud enough for my parents, from a faraway room with my door shut, to ask me to turn it down. Each time I had to say, "I can't, remember. I haven't found the remote." They would remember every time that was the only way to turn it down as well. But then one day I needed to get something out of my top desk drawer. The instant I pulled that drawer toward me, sure enough, what was staring up at me? The missing remote. There is absolutely no way any flesh and bone hands put it into my desk drawer. Another time something like this happened to me, I was 11 and in 6th grade. My 6th grade English class was at the point of doing oral reports in front of the whole class. I never had issues with public speaking, especially just in front of about 30 classmates, so no biggie to me. What was a biggie to me was that I had my entire speech nailed, barely needing to glance at the note card. But part of the assignment was turning in the note card after giving the speech. About 10 minutes before I had to leave to go to the bus stop, I double-checked my English folder to make sure I had everything for my speech that day. I knew I'd put it in that folder the evening before after going over my speech 1 or 2 more times. I was born organized. No way I didn't put it in my English folder. It wasn't there in my folder in front of my notebook in the right pocket, where I knew I put it. I looked behind the notebook. Not there. I looked through all of the papers that were in the left pocket. Not there either. I frantically looked through my bag in case it could have somehow fallen out the folder, which would have been impossible anyway, but I still needed to look there. Not there. I ran to my bedroom and looked all around the floor and my bed. Not there. I was getting stressed out and started to cry a bit. I'm not a crier either, so that's how much it was upsetting me and stressing me out. My English teacher was kind of like Judge Judy. I had to get going soon to make it to the bus stop, and went back to the kitchen where my bag was. Something told me to look one more time in my English folder. There it was, right in front of my notebook in the right pocket, just where I knew I put it, and where it should have been. Got an A+ on my oral report by speech that day, by the way. Another time, my mom couldn't find a certain bracelet of hers that she really liked. She looked everywhere for it, for more than a week. Nobody else in the house had seen it either. It was driving her crazy. For a brief moment, we all thought maybe one of the nurses had stolen it. We'd had some nurses steal from us before, but quickly dismissed it. The nurses we had at the time were wonderful people. A few weeks later, she was vacuuming around my bed. She'd vacuumed around it thoroughly, several times since the bracelet went missing. I heard the vacuum go off and her saying, "I don't freaking believe it. Angie, you won't believe this. I just found that bracelet that I've been looking for." "Really? Where the hell was it?" I asked her. "Right on the side of your bed, not underneath it, just laying there on the carpet." My sister had a black pearl necklace that she really liked and wore quite often. She was going out on a date one night and wanted to wear it. Every girl knows that when you have a favorite jewelry piece, you always know where it is by keeping it in the same place. She couldn't find it that evening and was looking through her room, jewelry boxes, and on her vanity shelves vigorously for it. Eventually, enough time had passed where she just had to pick something else to go with her ensemble for her date. Several days later, after she'd pulled into the driveway and was stepping out of her car, she was looking at the driveway under her feet. When she looked back in her car before closing the door, laying on one of the front seats was her black pearl necklace. She would either have sat on it if it was in the driver's seat, I forget which one it was on, and she would have definitely seen it on the passenger seat over the last several days. She used her car every day. When I was a teenager, I got into reading about fairy folk. Part Irish, so always interested me. And when I read the section about Bogarts, all these things made sense to me. Now, fairy folk Bogarts are absolutely nothing like the ones in Harry Potter. Even though they don't fall into the category of fairy that comes to mind most often for everybody, they are part of the fairy folk. The illustration showed a small kind of gremlin or goblin being that wears clothes. Some fairy folk don't. They aren't malevolent. Kind of tricksters, and the entry in the book said that they like to take things from people, usually eventually giving them back. That really struck a chord with me, and to this day I'm convinced that we've always had Bogarts in our house. I think they like watching people freak out trying to find what they took before they give it back. I taught myself years ago when I was reading up on these beings. Other fairy folk like to do the same thing, though. That when something goes missing, instead of going nuts trying to find it, I just say out loud, "Hey, house, I can't find whatever it is that just went missing after looking for it for a little bit, not going crazy over trying to find it. Could you please give it back? I would really appreciate it." I've yet to have a time asking that hasn't worked within a day or two, if not on the same day. I told my mom to do that as well when that happens. She has, and it's worked every time. So next time something of yours goes missing and you can't find it, I suggest doing the same thing. I bet you'll get it back, wherever you left it, or in a completely different place that it shouldn't have been at all. They like to be tricky and get a kick out of dumbfounding people, I think. Plus, I think they like knowing that we know about them and acknowledge them. Right in a place where it's practically slapping you in the face. Word to the wise, don't ever speak harshly to them, and always thank them when they bring it back. If you like creepy stories like these, please subscribe to the channel. If you don't, I will run out into the woods with a pork chop tied to my ass until a dog man eats me. And you don't want that?